Welcome in, Jeff Cameron Show and Warchant TV. We got an opportunity now. Matt Moscona going to join us, 104.5 ESPN there in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Alexandria. He's all over the place. You've seen him, and now he joins us. I'm excited about that because we got to get some perspective on LSU. It's almost go time, Matt. Welcome in. Thanks for taking time to join us. I appreciate it.
Hey, Jeff. It's my pleasure. Exciting time, man, for sure.
Yeah, real exciting time, in fact. And obviously, Florida State is playing this weekend as a warm-up. The main attraction everybody's looking forward to is this LSU game. But I think one of the things that stands out, and I want to start picking your brain right off the bat here, is nobody really knows what LSU is beyond talented. It's always difficult to get a read on the kind of transformation that occurs when coaching staffs are replaced. And most people certainly know who Brian Kelly is and his successes. And at the same time, one has to wonder, with the transformation, how quickly can he get this team playing at peak efficiency? They're certainly not devoid of talent. So give me your first impressions of Brian Kelly since you've been covering him and his arrival to Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I sure wish LSU had a week 0 game, but to maybe find out a little bit more about what they'll be. But Brian Kelly, I think, has surprised a lot of people. He surprised me. I guess you're not knowing much about Brian Kelly other than what you see from the outside. I always had the impression that he was sort of a cold, hard, standoffish Northeastern guy, red face. You see the rants, the yelling a lot on the sidelines. He's actually been quite the opposite with us. He's been very warm and engaging. I feel like as a beat that's covering his team, he's been maybe more willing to meet us halfway than maybe, from what I understand, he's been at any point in his career. He's opened practices at times fully, which hasn't happened in Baton Rouge in more than 30 years. He likes to tell jokes. They're not very good jokes, but he likes to tell jokes. But I think he has he's been warm, and I think Baton Rouge has really received him well. I know people ask me all the time about the fit. And what I tell people all the time is the 3 most successful coaches in LSU history. Skip Bertman, who won 5 baseball national titles, was a Jewish guy from Miami. Dale Brown was the 2nd winningest coach in SEC history behind only Adolph Rupp. He's from Minot, North Dakota. And Nick Saban, of course, from West Virginia, who spent his whole career in the Midwest before he got to Baton Rouge. And none of those guys maybe knew how to spell andouille or etouffee when they took the LSU job, but they won, and that's really all you have to do here.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I was just about to say, if he wins, he'll be a resident forevermore, right? I mean, they build statues for guys who do that, and he's done a lot of winning. It's been an elusive national championship that he has sought, and many believe that is certainly why he left Notre Dame, because what he's able to recruit – with that imprint right there, that footprint in the South and Louisiana, we all know. Now, let's get to the roster because that is my next question. How quickly will he succeed? How much of, I guess for lack of a better term, would you say, how much chaos was there over the last 2 seasons with Ed Orgeron? Because one would assume, or maybe that's just me, that one thing Brian Kelly is going to do immediately is instill discipline and kind of restore the locker room, if you will, and bring out the most in this talent that we talk about on a regular basis. For those Florida State fans that are listening to this that don't know, LSU has 3, possibly 4 NFL draft picks on the defensive line. The receiving core, it can be argued, if not the best. I guess you could argue Alabama's a better receiving core, but LSU is certainly in the conversation. They're not devoid of talent whatsoever. I guess talk about Brian Kelly and how quickly he can get this group playing at their best, because again, it seems to me from outside looking in that it seems self-evident that there was a lot of chaos over the last couple of years with Ed Orgeron.
Yeah, Jeff, to start with your question about how much chaos was there, for perspective, in this most recent NFL draft, LSU had 10 players drafted. The only program that had more players drafted was Georgia, the defending champion, with 15. That's an LSU team that went 6-7. It's unthinkable. Ed Orgeron literally admitted he hired Bo Pelini as his defensive coordinator without ever interviewing him. He completely lost control of the structure of his program. He was an inept hirer and evaluator of assistant coaching talent. You can look at things like during the BLM movement in the summer of 2020. He had his players march on campus without him intentionally to the president's office. To say the culture at LSU was bad is a gross understatement, and that's why within a year and a half of having the most dominant team in the history of college football, he was fired, and LSU paid him $17 million to go away. Brian Kelly is the antithesis of Ed Ogeron. Everything is with intention and purpose. Now, I'm not telling you that I know that this will work or will deliver championships, or I have a feeling on it, but he came in and uprooted something like 40 jobs within football ops. He met with everyone from his assistants to the people that answer the phones and the custodial staff, because there's a way he wants everything done. And when you're inheriting a program that had so much chaos and dysfunction, that order and structure is needed, not only for the players, but for everything within the building, from when former players are allowed to come in and visit, and who's at practice, and what time you eat. And I mean, Brian Kelly's implemented structured programs where, he has daily checklists and affirmations that he wants his players going through. But it's needed. I would say it's almost like, when you're a teacher of an elementary school, when your kids are going to lunch, they need to walk in a single file line with their finger over their mouth. By the time you get to high school, you should have a little more freedom where you just go to lunch. In college, hey man, figure it out. That's kind of maybe where Brian Kelly will eventually get this program too. But man, they needed structure and organization, and he immediately brought it. How much will that convert to wins initially? We'll start to find out. But boy, he had a pretty significant overhaul culturally that he inherited. But he did inherit a lot of talent.
It's interesting because Florida State fans listening to this right now can relate to some degree. There are different factors at play, but at the end of Jimbo Fisher's time in Tallahassee, things had gotten ugly as well, and the locker room was described as toxic. A lot of the loss of control of which you described was similar to what was happening in Tallahassee. There were some different factors that led to that. Fisher leaves, and Florida State makes a mistake, I think, in retrospect, and had to start over yet again in a short period of time. And so Mike Norvell implemented much of what you're describing that we see Brian Kelly doing at LSU now, which is kind of flipping the entirety of what they did on a daily basis, how they interacted, how they ate, how they practiced, how they worked out, what they did together, all of those things on and off the field. So it's certainly very relatable to the fans listening to this as they see these two teams take the field there in New Orleans in such a short period of time. I guess I'll start with the news out of camp for you, Matt. I want to ask what you've learned up to this point. I know John Emery's suspension has been a topic as of late. It's not as if, though, LSU doesn't have running backs that they feel good about. First, I would ask you, is he going to win his appeal? I'm not an expert on what happened there, but I've read enough to know that it seemed like something that would have been resolved in his favor. It hasn't been up to this point.
Yeah, Jeff, I'll tell you, a year ago, John Emery was taking first-team reps all the way up until the Thursday before the opener against UCLA. And I asked a staff member, why in the world didn't you plan for a contingency? How did you not consider the fact that you may not have this guy and to give someone else reps? And the answer was they never considered that they would lose the appeal, because during COVID, it felt as though the NCAA was granting everybody COVID waivers. I don't think that's an excuse. I think that's another flaw that Ed Ogeron had. But my point is, if John Emery wasn't granted the appeal a year ago, I don't know what would change now that he would be granted a waiver for these two games. So I would assume, and again, I don't know, I can't tell you that I know this answer definitively, but I would assume that John Emery would not be available against Florida State, which means Noah Cain, who's a Penn State transfer, would likely be the guy, along with Armani Goodwin, who's in his second year in Baton Rouge. And both those guys are very talented backs. Both have looked really good in camp. And I would tell you honestly, Jeff, I don't know that I could really differentiate among the three. I don't know that I would tell you John Emery was decidedly better than those two. in fall camp. The problem LSU has is the next guy is Josh Williams, who's a former walk-on. So they've got a couple of guys that they really like, but you're a turned ankle away from looking at a walk-on your depth chart. So that's the issue. They've got talented guys up front. The depth is the problem.
On the offensive line, everybody would look to that position as a problem from a year ago, but that was a position that also had talent and that, again, has talent. Now, some of that is in the form of a freshman recruit that everybody has heard about and certainly expects big things from. How quickly can he be great is always the question when you bring in a highly touted player like Will Campbell. But then in addition, I know there are transfers there. They're shuffling guys around, trying to find the best five. The offensive line numbers towards the end of last year weren't good. It was strange to look at some of those numbers in terms of pass protection and then also lack of success rate in the run game. Yet there were games that we saw with LSU where they were dominant. How would you assess that group so far in camp?
It's so strange. That was a unit that was not very good in 2020. But they returned everybody last year. And the point I made at this time a year ago was just because you return everybody from a unit that wasn't very good doesn't mean you're better. Those guys have to improve. And in the second half of the year, they did. The first half of the year was a real struggle. But to your point, 3 of those guys got drafted.
Yeah.
It was such a bizarre season, and it's hard to look at anything other than Ed Ogeron. But This is what I'll tell you, Jeff, about this offensive line. I think the 5 guys that LSU will start against Florida State, if you look ahead in 10 years, you would say those were 5 Sunday players. I think they'll all get their opportunity to play in the NFL. What is the great unknown, part of what you mentioned, right? Will Campbell is the best offensive lineman that Louisiana's produced probably since Andrew Whitworth, 20 years. He's a freshman. He's going to be starting his first collegiate game at left tackle. I don't know how that's going to go. Garrett Dellinger played a lot last year as a freshman. Very talented player. He's going to be playing center for the first time in his life. You're starting 2 transfers. You're starting a right tackle who was a guard a year ago. I think all those players are very talented and are going to play at the next level. But how do they function together in positions they haven't played and played with each other week 1 against that Florida State defensive front? That's a big question. I mean, I think this game, it looks like both teams have real questions on the offensive line and real strengths on the defensive line. And I think that in a nutshell is this game on September the 4th. It's like, which offensive line is going to be able to come together quickly enough against the opponent's really talented defensive front is probably going to be the story of this game.
Kind of screams take the under. If nobody can block anybody. But then again, both potentially with mobile quarterbacks. We know Jordan Travis is going to be the starter for Florida State. Is Jaden Daniels going to be the starter for LSU, or is it Nussmeier?
Man, we're 14 minutes in. I finally got a quarterback question.
Hey, I don't like to go to the quarterbacks early. We know games are won up front. I don't need to bother with the quarterbacks until we find out what's going on with the lines.
Yeah, look, I mean, Jeff, my take all along has been this was going to be Jaden Daniels' job, at least to take the first snap against Florida State. Is he going to be good enough to keep the job? We'll see how he plays and what this offense wants to be. But it makes so much sense. He is by far the most experienced guy with 30 career starts. Miles Brennan is now since ended his career, and Garrett Nussmeier has not started and only played 1 game extensively a year ago as a freshman. So Daniels is your most veteran guy. He is mobile, which is what this coaching staff wants. They want a quarterback that can make plays with his feet, that can extend plays if the pocket's collapsing, and you may need that behind this offensive line. And the other guys were here, and they made the decision to go get Jaden Daniels. So all of that circumstantial evidence kind of tells you what way I think they've been leaning all along. And I do think it'll be Jaden to take the first snaps against Florida State. But again, whether or not he plays well enough to keep that job remains to be seen.
Well, whoever wins the job is going to be thrown into a group of receivers that I described earlier in the interview as amongst the elite in the SEC. Maybe by season's end, they'll be the best. I don't imagine they've disappointed. All those guys, everybody knows about Butte, but all those guys have looked really good, I assume, in camp.
It's by far the greatest strength on this team. There's so much skill on the outside, and this state produces a ton of skilled athletes. Not that dissimilar from Florida, but Kayshon Boutte is there, and I think everyone knows he's a potential All-American first-round pick. He is dynamic, and nobody on this defense has been able to guard him in any of the drills we've been able to see. But it doesn't just stop there. Malik Neighbors is a guy who really popped last year as a freshman. They've moved him into the slot just to get him onto the field more. Jeray Jenkins is a senior who will be probably a middle-round draft pick. Even beyond that, Jack Besh, who was second on the team in receptions a year ago after Kayshon Boutte got hurt. And then you've got these really dynamic guys like Brian Thomas and Chris Hilton, who are sophomores this year, who are just trying to find a way on the field because there's so much depth. LSU has explosive playmakers at receiver. They've got an embarrassment of riches in talent at that position. The question really is, can the quarterback stay upright to get him the football? I mean, that is just the big unknown with this team. But the biggest strength on offense is receiver. The biggest strength on defense is defensive line. After that, it's fair to ask a lot of questions about any other position group on this team. But those two should be really, really good.
Yeah, you mentioned the defensive line because I was going to ask if you didn't pick the wide receiver position, you certainly would have picked defensive line because that's 4 guys that are going to be playing in the league, minimum. 3 for sure, I guess I should say. I mean, I love LSU's defensive line coming into this season.
Yeah, and so Matt House is the new defensive coordinator. He comes in. He was the linebacker coach with the Chiefs. Prior to that, he was the defensive coordinator at Kentucky. You might remember when Josh Allen had the big year at Kentucky, 17 sacks, 21 tackles for loss, became a first-round pick. Well, Matt House was his defensive coordinator. So I think what they did in that defense, and one of the changes that they're making in this one is they're not looking at a traditional 3-4 or 4-3. They're kind of running like a 3-2 with a jack linebacker and primarily a nickel in their base. And that's the role B.J. Ojulari, that jack is what B.J. Ojulari is going to play. And you're seeing him pop up on a lot of first-round mock drafts. He's just a really athletic edge guy that is going to be a problem for college offensive linemen to block. They were looking for depth at that position, and throughout this fall camp, I think they found it in a guy like Desmond Little, who's a name you don't know, but he wears number 8 now, and he's a 6'5" edge linebacker, so you're not going to be able to miss him if he gets on the field. But but if there's one other guy I tell you to really keep an eye on, who I think has got the biggest boom potential this year, it's Mason Smith. He's a big guy in the middle. He wears number 0, and he was a 5-star number 1 defensive lineman in the country. For those who follow recruiting, to remember the name. He has been largely unblockable throughout fall camp. He is the guy that, as you project, is the future top 10, top 15 pick in the draft. He's provided he stays healthy and all that stuff. There's a reason. Look, Ed Ogeron was a defensive line coach and is known as a great recruiter, and he recruited very well at that position. There is no shortage of talent across that defensive front, as you'd expect with a guy like Ogeron, building that roster. Maximizing the talent he had, putting good coaches in place, that was a problem with Ed. But recruiting and getting good talent on this roster was not an issue, and certainly wasn't an issue on the defensive line.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I have LSU going over that initial. If you could get it at 6.5 early in the summer, you had to jump on it, but I think it's 7 now. I still like LSU to be one of the quote-unquote surprise teams of the West. Everybody's going to obviously pick Alabama, and then people will focus on Texas A&M, but I really like LSU's talent, and you're not telling me anything that I didn't think I'd hear from you. That basically, and what I mean by that is you're telling my audience exactly what I thought, which is that this is a team that has talent. If they gel quickly and he gets them to play smart and disciplined football, LSU could win 9 or 10 games. Now, albeit it's in the brutal schedule and it's a tough SEC, but is there anything about this matchup that you've heard, and at least in terms of talk from FSU people, talk from LSU people, that we're not discussing that interests you beyond just the cachet of the two schools? What is it? Is there an element of this game that you think might stand out and be the difference?
Special teams. LSU is LSU is a team where if you look at this season, they are going to be a decided underdog against Alabama, and should be. They will be a heavy favorite in their non-conference games, and probably about a touchdown favorite at home against Mississippi State. Every other game on this schedule, I expect it's going to be a 3-point spread one way or the other. Look, the LSU-Florida State game, I think it's LSU 3 right now. That's going to be this entire season for LSU. They replaced every specialist on the team. They lost their long snapper, their punter, their place kicker, their kickoff guy, their holder. They lost everybody. And they tried to supplement through the transfer portal. They brought in a long snapper from East Carolina, Jay Bramblett, punter from Notre Dame, followed Brian Kelly down here. He's also holding. But as far as place kicking and kickoff duties, that's a giant question. And if you're going to play a whole bunch of one-possession games, which I think LSU will this year, and you don't have a kicker, that's not a great recipe. So that is a gigantic hold-your-breath moment for LSU. Anytime – look, last year, Cade York was LSU's kicker. He's the best kicker in the history of the program. He was a kicker drafted in the 4th round by the Browns.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeff, it was literally like if LSU got inside the 40 points, that was the expectation was just, okay, you're inside, you're getting points. I mean, like Florida State's had great kickers over the years. You know what that's like whenever, Graham Gano, whoever. I mean, we all know that if it was Janikowski, there's just times where you have a kicker where you just feel like it's automatic. That's what LSU had the last 2 years. Last 3 years, actually, because they had Cole Tracy as well. But that ain't the case this year. And I'm going to tell you, if LSU's in a one-possession, let's say LSU's down a point in the 4th quarter to Florida State, and they got to line up for a 42-yard field goal from the left hash to win it, a year ago, I told you put it on the board. Today, I don't know. I mean, nobody ever wants to talk special teams. I'm telling you, if you're looking at that game coming up on September the 4th, watch LSU special teams.
Man, it's funny. We're holding up mirrors here, brother. I got to tell you, Florida State fans will be in that same stadium holding their breath if it's a 42-yard field goal trailing by a point to LSU. It is the exact same thing. And you're right. Nobody thinks about it when it's automatic. I mean, Roberto Aguayo in college was as good as they come. You mentioned Sebastian Janikowski. That's back when I was in school.
Yeah.
It's remarkable when you've got an automatic guy. Graham Gano was great too. You're right. It changes the game because you understand that the success rate beyond the 50 is automatic just about. I mean, there's been a couple of seasons where Florida State had a kicker miss 2 kicks total, and it's a difference maker immediately. So you're right. I think it's an interesting aspect to this game. A lot of question marks around both teams going into this contest. Hey, Matt, great job. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate the conversation, getting to know you a little bit. I'll tell everybody once again, 104.5 ESPN there in Baton Rouge, 3 to 6 Central Time. If you're looking for Matt, you can find him there and find him really all over the place because as I research you, I found you all over YouTube. Great work, sir. And I look forward to maybe meeting you there in New Orleans, and take care.
Man, if you can spell my last name, you can find me on the internet.
Moscona, got it. Be good, man.
Thanks, Jeff.
Take care.